What is up, my beautiful gemstones? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, thanks for checking us out. My name is GemmaJade, but today we are going to be discussing the Phantom Stalker of Bill and Dorothy Wacker. As I'm filming this, Tuesday night's video still has not released, where I was doing the video in a different style, a more conversational style, and I'm still waiting for the general consensus about whether or not you guys enjoyed that, and I should continue doing that going forward. So this is going to be an average normal video that I've always done, just so you guys know. If you liked the Janelle Potter case and the way that I presented that to y'all better, you guys got to let me know, and I will do my best going forward to do more of that styled content. Let's jump into this case today, though, because it's incredibly strange. I really don't know what to think about it. This is reminiscent to me of Cindy James, where, you know, the people really feel like they're being stalked. They really feel like something terrifying is happening to them, but there's never any evidentiary proof. There's never any tangible evidence. There's never anything to really clearly state what was actually going on here. That's why this is referred to as the supernatural stalker case. And I want you guys to let me know what you all think in the comments below when the video is all done. More often than not, unless you're a celebrity, most people in the world will never have to really worry about a stalker. We talk a lot on this channel about paranormal stalkers of certain kinds, but this case is very different. Bill and Dorothy Wacker were regular, upstanding citizens with no known enemies, living in a quiet and unassuming life, and no one ever imagined that a mysterious stalker with dark and malicious intent would set its sights or their sights on this couple. As I said, if you remember the case of Cindy James and even the case of Cynthia Anderson, you'll know that there's oftentimes no face to put to the madness and very little proof that anything untoward or dangerous is actually happening in the first place, but for the person or people involved to have to bear the brunt of the stalker's wrath towards them. Having no one to believe them is absolutely devastating, more so even with the added tragedy that there's no one to turn to when things actually do start becoming dangerous. Our case today comes from a small town in Ohio where a happily married and seemingly average couple found themselves at the mercy of a nameless, faceless phantom stalker with malicious intent. And it's all the more disturbing because this case does still remain unsolved to this very day. With nothing more, let's jump right in. An elderly couple named Bill and Dorothy Wacker were leading a quiet life in the small and peaceful town of Massillon in Stark County, Ohio. They lived in this town for their entire lives, each of them, and they'd been married and living together for the past 48 years before all of this occurred. They were both very well liked to their neighbors, had no known enemies, and in fact, they never had a single ounce of trouble until one day in 1984 when they came home to find their house ransacked and rolled through as if someone had broken in and was looking for something. Their belongings had been thrown all over the place, and while it looked as though someone had been in there searching for something specific, at the end of the day, they both realized that nothing at all was missing from their home. Because all they were left with was a gigantic mess and nothing that had been taken from them, they didn't go to the police, and they didn't tell anyone about what they'd come home to that day. This was all very strange and unexpected for many reasons, but mainly due to the fact that the town they lived in was very rural and extremely peaceful, and things like robberies and break-ins just didn't happen there at this time. Everyone in the town knew everyone else, and people didn't even lock their doors when they slept or when they left their homes for any reason. They all trusted one another, but concerning Bill and Dorothy, that wouldn't last very long after the first incident, of which, by the way, there would be many. Not too long after the first home invasion, the Wackers experienced another break-in, and once again, the house was turned upside down and left in complete and total disarray and shambles, and yet again as well, nothing had been taken from the home. They once again didn't alert the authorities, and at first, I thought this was odd, right? Because their home had obviously been broken into. But if you think about it, they could have been thinking that maybe because nothing was stolen, there was nothing to really report. You have to consider the time this happened, the 1980s, and also where it was happening, which was a very small and rural community in Ohio, where more than likely it would not only have caused fear in the people who knew the Wackers, but also their reputation could have suffered because of it. Those are just my thoughts, though, about why they didn't notify the authorities after the first 2 times. But anyway, on January 16th, 1985, the third break-in where nothing was stolen, but everything was messed up and some things were destroyed seems to have been the charm, and Bill finally called the police to report all 3 incidents. A full investigation was launched, but the authorities couldn't even come up with a suspect at that time. There just wasn't enough evidence. No reason for anyone to have done this to this couple seemed to be able to be uncovered, and because they had no known enemies and everyone in town seemed to think fondly of them, the police didn't know what to do or where to go from there. If you think about it, there really was nothing they could have done due to the extreme lack of evidence in the case at this point anyway. Nothing new ever turned up and nothing had been found out, and eventually, Bill and Dorothy just went back to living their normal lives, hoping to be able to put the odd events behind them. However, they did have some trouble with doing that because every little noise made them think that perhaps someone was there to break in again, and they also spent a lot of time wondering if and when it would happen again. In fact, Bill reported later on that every time he would hear something, even the smallest little sound in the middle of the night, he would jump up out of bed and go to check the doors and windows to make sure that they were locked and that their home wasn't being violated again. Things remained quiet though, and for a while it seemed like those 3 break-ins were all there was going to be, that was going to be it, and they were going to be able to go back to living their normal lives again. And eventually, and with time, they hoped that they would stop jumping at every little noise. They thought the situation was over. Things went back to normal for about 6 months, and the Wackers had all but put the strange events behind them. But right around the 6-month mark, the next phase of this bizarre and creepy story would start, as would the next chapter of Bill and Dorothy's phantom nightmare. Sometime in July of 1985, Dorothy was at home relaxing and staying off of her feet as she just had heart surgery. All of their friends and neighbors knew she was convalescing and knew to leave her alone and not to bother her at all. So when she heard a very loud and insistent knocking on the front door that day, she was confused, and she was also a little startled about who would be there knocking and bothering her. She did make her way to the door, and when she looked through the window, she saw a blonde man, a Caucasian whom she'd never seen before and didn't know, and she asked him through the door what he wanted and who he was. Dorothy at first was a little startled and a little bit panicked. She was home alone and recovering from major surgery, and she didn't want to let some strange man into the home. There's nothing that states this for fact, but I would presume she was also thinking about all of those break-ins, even if just briefly, and she more than likely was even more fearful for that reason. However, she reasoned that the man looked normal and clean-cut, and she didn't get the feeling that he would pose any sort of threat to her at all. Dorothy agreed to let the man in to use the phone, as he had said his car had broken down the road and he needed to use a phone. There were no cell phones back then, so after thinking about it for a minute, she did agree to let him in, and she unlocked and opened the door for him to enter. The man went right to the phone, and she could hear his conversation from where she was in the next room. She heard him say goodbye to whomever he was speaking to, and then he headed out the front door again. He left without saying a word, and Dorothy thought it was extremely strange that he didn't even yell to her to say thank you, and she thought maybe he hadn't actually left yet but was waiting outside for a ride or something. She got up with the intention of walking to the window and looking out to see if the man was still there or if he'd actually left without thanking her or saying anything more to her. However, she wouldn't make it to the window because as soon as she stepped foot in the living room, something hit her over the head and she was knocked unconscious. Dorothy woke up sometime later to find herself bound and gagged in the kitchen of her home. She was obviously terrified, this elderly and sick woman who had just had surgery on her heart of all things, and it angers me to hear that someone did something like this to her. She looked around and tried to slow her breathing so that she could hear better as she was trying to determine where the intruder was in the home at that time or if he was there at all. She saw no sign of him and then started worrying about where he could have been, when he would be back, what his intentions were with her, etc. All very normal things to be scared about in this kind of situation. She decided to take a risk and started to crawl and squirm her way to the kitchen window, the whole time thinking the man was right around the corner and just waiting for her to find the courage to try and make a move. But she made her way to the window and was able to somehow flag down neighbors. Now, there's no information as to how she did this, but I'm assuming she somehow was able to yell through the gag loud enough for someone passing by or right next door to hear her. The stranger never returned during any of this, and the neighbors were able to help her and get an ambulance to her right away. Luckily, Dorothy hadn't sustained any serious or long-lasting injuries from the bizarre attack, and she was lucid enough once she was in the hospital to be able to give a good description of her assailant to the authorities. A sketch was made, and when the police searched the house, they found that some things had actually been stolen that time. None of their valuables, jewelry or cash, had been taken, but rather a strange and somewhat eclectic mix of items had been stolen from the Wacker home. These items included a .22 caliber revolver, a movie camera, an antique watch, and a radio scanner. These items, some of them anyway, are very 1980s, by the way, but I'm confident most of you will know what they are. Also, and this was the most bizarre part of all for me about this whole thing, the authorities found a message scrawled on the wall in crayon. It said, quote, "cheaper, but will do," end quote. No one had a clue what the strange message meant, why the attacker chose Dorothy to assail, and why at that time, and still to this day, no one has those answers, or really any answers at all. Why were those specific items taken when much more valuable things were lying all over the home in plain sight, including cash? We will most likely never know the answers, and that's very frustrating to say the least. After that whole ordeal, the couple began receiving harassing phone calls on their landline. As I said, cell phones didn't exist in the 80s at that time, for most average people at least. The calls would come in at all hours of the day and night, with the person on the other end normally breathing very heavily into the receiver or sometimes remaining completely and eerily silent. Sometimes the calls would be more menacing and more frightening for the elderly victims, with the person on the other end swearing angrily and yelling loudly, threatening and offensive things, most of the time mocking them as well, before slamming the receiver down and hanging up. The couple were terrified by that time, and they tried changing their phone number, but each and every time, this phantom stalker would get it somehow and start calling and harassing them again. During this time, when the phone calls were happening multiple times a day, almost every day, the items that had been stolen from the home when Dorothy was attacked started to reappear on their doorstep one by one. Each time, the item would be carefully wiped down and cleaned, arriving one at a time and wrapped in plastic shopping bags. No fingerprints or other evidence was ever able to be collected from any of those items. By this time, it was obvious that all of this was connected to the initial break-ins. Dorothy's attack, the phone calls, the returning of the items were all connected and were all being done by the same person or people. They knew for sure, as did the authorities, that the young blonde man who knocked on the door and assaulted Dorothy that fateful day was responsible, but no one knew who he was, why he was doing all of this, to this seemingly sweet and elderly couple. Also, no one knew if he was working alone or not. It wasn't over yet, though. The unsettling harassment of phone calls and random stolen objects being left on the doorstep would begin to escalate. There would be banging on the doors and outside walls of the home, but when they looked outside, no one was ever there. The unsettling harassment of phone calls and random stolen objects being left on the doorstep would eventually begin to escalate. There would be banging on the doors and outside walls of the home, but when they looked outside, no one would ever be there. This continued for months until Bill decided to put a security light out around his home, which was motion censored and would turn on if triggered by someone walking too close to the home while the light was off. However, this only elicited a note that seemed to mock the couple's efforts, and it was left on their doorstep the day after they put the light out there with the intention to ward off whoever it was. The note read, quote, "Your lights are a laugh," end quote. Lights spelled Lightz. That was the first of many notes that would be left on the front doorstep of the Wacker's home, and they all ranged from mildly creepy to downright terrifying, and all of them were written in a childish scrawl and devoid of any fingerprints or any other evidence. This harassment and torment went almost nonstop for years, and despite numerous visits from the police and more than a few thorough investigations, no one knew who the culprit was or why anyone would do such a thing to anyone, let alone a sweet and unassuming elderly couple. It became even more crucial the perpetrator be caught when Dorothy was attacked again on October 27, 1993. Yes, I said 1993, which means by this time the harassment had been going on for 8 or 9 years with no signs of slowing down or stopping anytime soon. On that day in October, an unseen assailant carried out another surprise attack on Dorothy, and whoever it was knocked her to the ground again by hitting her over the back of the head with something heavy, and this time she was left with lacerations on her skull and a concussion. This brutal attack pushed the Wackers to finally at least attempt to do something to catch this sicko in the act. Why they just didn't move, I really don't know, but I'm sure they were very comfortable in their home as they'd been there half a century or more by the time 1993 rolled around, and they more than likely didn't want to be scared out of their home or bullied out of it, and also, Who's to say that if they moved, the person wouldn't just follow them to wherever they went? They were very old, and I doubt they were ever going to be able to move too far away, so what would be the point in moving, I guess? Bill and Dorothy got some friends and relatives together to help them stake out the home, and 3 groups of people positioned themselves at various locations around the house using walkie-talkies to communicate back and forth with one another. They sat there all night, vigilantly staking out the home and looking for anyone or anything suspicious in any way, shape, or form. However, no one saw anything, and they thought the stalker either didn't come that night or that they'd somehow scared him off, which would actually be a good thing, right? Because now the stalker would be like, oh wow, they're putting people outside, they're setting up shop to try and catch me. But that wasn't the case. Once they called it a night and went inside to get some rest, they saw that the phantom had been there after all. It's just that no one out there had seen him. A note was left for them on the back porch, another scrawled memo that was seemingly in response to the stakeout. It read, quote, "Get the message," end quote. Whoever this person was had somehow been able to sneak into the Wacker's yard with all of those people there, so 11 people, positioned all over the yard and outside of the home, and without anyone seeing him, get a message written and left for them all at the same time, and no one saw or heard anything. How in the world did this person do that? And that's one of the reasons I entitled this The Phantom Stalker. He was like a phantom. No one knows how he did this, but it's crazy to me, and I can't understand it for the life of me. The campaign of terror orchestrated by this lunatic and aimed at this sweet and innocent elderly couple never ended. Bill Wacker passed away on July 9th, 1999, and Dorothy passed away on July 22nd, 2010, and they both left this earth without knowing who had done these things to them or why. This case was notably featured on the original Unsolved Mysteries with the late, great Robert Stack, but it remained a mystery that's never been solved. There are many theories, though, with the main one being this was all done by someone the couple knew well, but there's never been any evidence to support these claims. It's just what makes the most sense to the people most familiar with and involved in the case, including the authorities who investigated it. Some people even went so far as to accuse Bill Wacker himself as being the perpetrator, and I knew that was coming eventually because we've seen it happen a few times here on this channel. In cases where someone was stalked and harassed and usually killed, they blame either the person being stalked or harassed or the closest person to them, even without any evidence. It's just like, who else could have done it, right? We always see this pop up, and I wasn't surprised to see it. I found something on Reddit, believe it or not, that caught my eye, and I thought it was good enough theory in support of it being someone close to the family that I did decide to include it here. The person wrote, quote, "What is odd is that despite receiving a blow to the head that knocked her out, she didn't have serious injuries. Taking a blow that knocks you out long enough to be bound and gagged is usually fairly serious. I also found it odd that whomever saw fit to ransack their house did it 3 times. Typically, professional thieves knock over a couple of choice houses and move on. But when I consider that it might have been a family member, this detail makes more sense. I have several friends that have been robbed by family members, often more than once, as the thief usually only takes what they feel they need at the time. This fits with the random return of stolen items and the taunting messages. This part feels personal. This is a part that makes me feel strongly that it was a person known to them doing this. When I see that the stalker then continues to call them after they change their phone number, I am fairly certain that this person has an in somehow with the Wackers. It would take a lot of footwork to get their numbers that reliably after multiple changes," end quote. And that's true. This is 1984 when all this started, even if it was a few years after, which I'm not sure. The timeline was a little wonky on this one. But, like, you could look in the phone book, but if someone changes their number because of harassment, they would more than likely get an unlisted number, meaning they would have to give the number out or maybe know someone that, like, works at the phone company. Like, you know, it would be crazy if the Wackers didn't give whoever this was their number themselves for whatever reason. And personally, I don't know about all the rest of it, but the fact that the perpetrator knew their numbers each of the at least 3 times that they changed it shows me, it's common sense, that it was someone they knew and that they trusted enough to give their new numbers to despite everything that was going on with them at the time. And that makes me really angry, and that makes this case all the more sad. Because whoever this was, the Wackers, even with everything else going on, trusted this person or these people enough that they gave them their number thinking they'd be safe. Another thing that struck me as odd and seemingly impossible unless someone close to the couple was involved was the fact that the note was left on the back door with all the people around outside of the house and in plain sight of that door the entire night. If one person needed a break, there were 2 more there as they were all surveilling the home in groups of 3. I even wondered if it was one of the groups, meaning not just one person, but I don't know, and I'm just speculating. How else would someone have been able to completely and totally slip past all of those people? Even if it was someone in the family or someone otherwise close to the couple, what would the motive have been? At the end of the day, we're left with more questions and no answers. Who was the perpetrator? Why did they choose Bill and Dorothy? And how many people were involved? Where does the young man with blonde hair fit into all of this? Because that person wasn't a known person. He didn't even seem to be a known person in the community because the sketch brought no leads. He was someone Dorothy had never met before, and I also wondered why the authorities didn't do a check on what number or numbers were called by him while he was in the house. Now, after I wrote this script, I looked further into that. They did look into that, which numbers he called. He hadn't called anyone. He had pretended to make a phone call to call someone to pick him up, claiming to Dorothy that his car had broken down and he was in desperate need of a phone. I have a heart for the elderly specifically, and it sickens and angers me when they're abused or mistreated in any way. They normally cannot fight back. How is it possible that the authorities were never able to come up with a single clue, despite all the near constant activity happening at that house for more than a decade? Nobody knew any of the answers then, and still today in 2025, no one knows now, which makes this case just another in a long line in the annals of creepy and mysterious cases that more than likely will never be solved. That's all I have for you today, guys. Please give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed the content, if you enjoyed hanging out with me. Spread the love by sharing this video. Subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure you hit the notification bell so that you can get notified when I post each and every week, notified for my live streams and everything that I'm doing over here. Please go over to TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook and follow me, support me over there on those other platforms. I really could use the support so I can hit the creator program on TikTok. I'm working on monetization on Facebook and IG as well. Thank you to everyone, my patrons, my members, people who donate through the live streams, through the comments, to my PayPal and Cash App. I really do appreciate it, even if I don't specifically name y'all by name every single video, every single week. Like I said in the past few videos, and like I've been saying in live streams and in the shorts and TikToks I've been doing, things are a-changing for the better here on the Gemma Jade channel. It's been almost 5 years. It's time to switch it up a notch. All right, to take it up a notch and switch it up a bit, I should say. Check out the description box for some important links, ways to donate to the channel to ensure that I'm paid for my work. PayPal, Cash App, my Amazon wish list gift link. Also, guys, please, the link for Dubby will be the pinned comment and also the first thing you'll see in the description box. Dubby energy drink made with coffee nut extract. This stuff is so much better for you and your body than Red Bull and other energy drinks, in my opinion. All right, you get 10% off site-wide at Dubby.com with my code Gemstones. I am working on doing some ads and shorts and TikToks for advertisement for Dubby. I've done a few. Please, guys, you can help me in that way. You know, get something for yourself while also helping me make a little money on the side as well, because I do need to get paid for my work, and I know I'm beating a dead horse. Please check out Dubby.com. I clicked the link, check it out. If it's not for you, it's not for you. But if it is for you, 10% off site-wide with code Gemstones, all lowercase, GEMSTONES. That's your code, guys. I chose that for y'all. Also in the description box, you will find links to all 14 of my books, Kindle paperback and Audible edition, or you can just go to Amazon and type in Gemma Jade Books to see my whole 14 book collection. 6 or 7 of them, I can't even remember now, are bestsellers. I've got books about all kinds of supernatural material and paranormal content, missing persons cases. Guys, please check out my books. If you want an autographed copy, please email me before you make the purchase. Products I sell, services I offer, for any and all correspondence, please do not PM me, DM me, TikTok, or Facebook message me. Email me for any and all correspondence, including putting in orders for spiritual helper boxes, bath salts, any of that stuff that I sell, or for more information about it, GemmaJadeParanormal@gmail.com. Be kind to each other, guys. It doesn't cost anything. Be kind to yourselves and never accept anything less than others being kind to you. If nobody told you today, you are amazing, you are incredible, you deserve nothing but the best. Put the actionable steps behind your manifestations and know that I believe in you and I got your back. Always go in grace, smile at a stranger, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.